Hello, everybody. Welcome to Poke Lore Podcast. I am Professor Pine, and joining me is Professor Cedar. Today, we're going to be going over typings for everybody that is new to Pokemon, maybe needs a refresher, maybe has never touched it and wants to understand what it is their kids are doing in their basement, whatever. But we're going over it to better understand what the typings are, how they work, and then maybe you will go play Pokemon with your kids and not neglect them. Um, so,
What an opening.
uh, what's that?
Said what an opening.
I know, right? I'm just full of them. Okay. So first, we're going to talk typing. We have to talk species. So in the Pokemon world, the concept of species carries a meaning unlike its counterpart in real world biology. Here, species are not bound by the rigid rules of nature. They're fluid and evolving and extraordinary. Where real world species are defined by shared traits and the ability to produce fertile offspring, Pokemon transcend such limitations. A Pokemon can change its species entirely through evolution, a process more akin to metamorphosis or personal growth, where a small, unassuming creature transforms into something grander, stronger, and stranger. It's said that most living Pokemon descend from a common ancestor, a primordial species of Mew, a psychic pink cat-like Pokemon that populated the world created by Arceus.
Yeah, so I guess right away we have a pretty big distinction in how the process of evolution works and speciation works within Pokemon. If I'm not mistaken, they all lay eggs, correct? None of them are like in the middle.
Yeah, all Pokemon lay eggs in
Yeah.
the anime. Yeah, there's no exception to that. Even Arceus, the Pokemon god,
Came from
comes
egg.
comes into this as an egg, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's kind of it's weird. They're reptiles, but they're not, I guess. They're mammals, but they're not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Very
Yeah,
interesting. And even the concept of
yeah,
evolution too in it is different than how evolution would operate in the real world.
sure. Yeah.
Like they just change species altogether. And like
Right.
quickly, rapidly too.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Now, I just want to jump back to one of our last episodes that we did, just because we're talking about how all of the species originated with Mew, this psychic pink cat type Pokemon. um, in our last episode, we discussed how Mew seems to have laid eggs or transformed or something like that into these other Pokemon beings. Um, But whatever the case, it's not Mew evolving into a Charmander. It's laying an egg or something. It's kind of vague. It doesn't really go into tons of detail, but it's interesting how that kind of plays out. Where here, if we're gonna talk about evolution in human terms, it's either species jumping. We all started as plankton, turned into fish, turned into reptiles, turned into birds, turned into people. In this, it's everything starts from a Mew who potentially lays an egg. Out of the egg comes a Charmander, a Bulbasaur, a Squirtle, so on and so forth. Or Mew is somehow changing or dying off and leaving behind some of these animals. It's hard to say, really. It's complicated.
Yeah. And if it's not laid out, obviously, in the lore, then we're only left to guess at what it could possibly be. A
Right.
gradual processional change of Mews into different species, or, and considering how Pokemon evolve, it could just be that rapid species jump, right? how you're saying
Right.
it's a
And
fundamentally.
something to keep in mind as well, just since we're talking about sudden and sometimes really drastic evolution when it comes to Pokemon, with the introduction of Scarlet and Violet, they started talking about future and past Pokemon. So now you have, geez, I was going to get his name wrong. I'm not even going to use him because I'll screw it up right now. Salamence, as an example. Salamence has I don't know if you'd want to call it a primal form, but it's like an ancient version of a Salamence where it's not called Salamence. I think it's called like Soaring Moon or something like that, and kind
Okay.
of resembles a Salamence, but it's different looking. In the same way, we have what's his name? Virizion, I think is his name, a legendary grass type. And Virizion has a future form that's basically like one of those robot dogs that you would buy at Toys R Us, except it's really, really big and robotic. So it, I mean, and in our last episode, we touched on how all of these legendaries came into being and brought shape and form into the universe and the world, but it kind of left it at there was Mew. Magikarp used to be smart, which still blows my mind. And then suddenly, I think it was like 20,000 years had passed, and then there's the introduction to people.
Yeah.
So lots of time for those ancient Pokemon, and who knows when these future Pokemon come into play,
Right. Yeah, that, and we should
right?
mention that there are some of the legendaries that are created by Arceus directly who don't come from you. It's a handful. And then also humans are Pokemon in a weird roundabout way, which also means that they didn't have any kind of evolutionary process themselves. Um so that
Yeah,
like
or are they
humans,
the final evolution of all Pokemon?
all Pokemon will become people.
Yeah,
Pokemon
maybe.
become okay.
Could you
Interesting.
imagine you're lonely and you can't find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, so you just raise a Pokemon till it turns into a boy or a girl?
There's so many disturbing implications that I think are going to come further as we
I
delve
know.
further
Yeah.
into all this.
Can
But
you imagine buying a Pokeball from the Pokemart and on the label it specifically says "Do not throw at people"? Oh man. Okay, sorry. We'll carry on. Every species is a name unto itself, spoken with reverence and capitalized to mark its uniqueness. Pikachu, Charmander, Bulbasaur, these are not just names but identities. Grammatically, Pokemon plurals are the same as singulars. Like the plural for moose is moose. So too, all Pokemon in plural are referred to as the singular, one Pikachu and two Pikachu. Yet within the boundaries of a species name, individuality still thrives. A Pokemon may be known by its species name. Pikachu used Thundershock. But to those who form deep bonds with them, nicknames emerge, marking them as unique companions rather than just another member of their kind. Um, oh man, I was going to say something, but then my mind just left me. So I'll just continue on. Today, 1,025 known species populate the Pokemon world, a living tapestry of life in every imaginable form. Some resemble the animals and plants of the real world, echoing nature's beauty and diversity. Others stretch far beyond, wielding powers that defy reality itself, manipulating fire, summoning storms, or bending the forces of time and space. Each species belongs to an element, a type that defines its role in this world, like brush strokes painting the balance of nature. Um, so, something I'll add here with every single type of Pokemon that there is, so far as I can see, if you read their name, you'll be able to kind of figure out what their typing is. So, as an example, Charmander, char, something is charred, probably fire. Squirtle, so squirt, squirt, like a squirt gun, right? Bulbasaur has a bulb is a plant, right? They all have their typing kind of included in their name.
Would you say that's true for all of them or just a lot of them? Because I'm just mentally going through them, trying to think if I can.
Very few exceptions that I can
Yeah.
think of. Like, now some of them you might have to dig a little bit deeper. They're not so cut and dry.
Or
Like, as an
evidence.
example, Solomon's,
Yeah.
like, you're going to look at that and go, geez, like, what the hell are you, right? But um, I'm sure if you were to look into where they took Solomon's from, say if it's a Greek word, it's probably Greek for dragon or Greek for something, right? So
Yeah.
you may have to look into that a little bit, but you'll be able to figure it out.
Well,
Usually you can look at it and tell as well, right?
yeah, I can say right away that Solomon's comes from the word salamander, which did mean dragon. So
There
yeah.
you go. Right. So, Mewtwo is another one where it's not specifically mentioned what he is, but if you look at him, it's a little bit clear that way. Like he kind of looks like he does some really freaky psychic stuff, right? Like,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. No, no, I agree. And I think we'll delve into like the etymology of the Pokemon names as we go through them individually too, that we can dig into that more
sure.
specifically. But yeah, you are like I said, I'm going through them mentally and I'm like, maybe not all of them, but a good number of them you can tell kind of
Well, even
their name is worked into what they are.
yeah, but see where you look at Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, right?
Yeah.
Chan is they Hitmonchan was actually based off of Jackie Chan. All right. Hitmonlee is based off of Bruce Lee. They're
Yeah.
fighters, so these are fighting types.
Yeah.
So like I say, some of it you have to kind of delve into a little bit, but it's usually in the name, or you can tell by looking at it what it is,
Yeah.
typically.
And
Right.
they're also coded like by color and things like that kind of tip you off as to
Right.
what they generally are. Another kind of cultural thing about the word elements too. Obviously, in modern science, elements are defined through atoms, um, but that's not what we're talking about here. The elements of Pokemon are more like in the traditional sense of elements, the Platonic and Eastern elements of like fire, earth, wind, water, spirit or ether. Some include wood or metal in that
Mhm.
ancient elemental alchemical version of elements. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, also something else that I'm going to throw in here, just because of what we were just reading about, how the typings kind of mirror the human world. The creator of Pokemon, and I bring this up partially because there are some people out there that were forbidden from ever touching Pokemon, playing Pokemon. They were told it was witchcraft and evil and all sorts of crazy nonsense. And in reality, the creator of Pokemon didn't have any of that stuff in mind when he created Pokemon. He created it because of his love for animals and nature. And he wanted to bring that and the relationship that people have with nature into a video game, a series, a manga that people can enjoy. Um, yeah, stuff like that.
yeah, we could maybe do an episode on like misconceptions about Pokemon too, because I remember that. There's also like real world cultural reasons why people would avoid Pokemon as well, just like a fad that kids are getting into or something that kids would spend too much money on. I know personally that
Yeah,
people got stabbed over Pokemon cards, so there are other elements to that
yeah,
too.
yeah, that's true.
We
That's
can
true.
definitely do a whole episode unto itself on that as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
Which, yeah,
All right. I can handle this next part here.
okay,
So, and yet the count of 1025 feels only like the beginning. Whispers linger in the hearts of explorers and scholars, hinting at more Pokemon yet to be discovered, hidden in uncharted worlds and concealed in myths, or waiting in the shadows of the unknown. For in the Pokemon world, discovery is endless, and with every new species, the world grows ever more wondrous. Um, just as I was reading that, I'm reminded of an episode from when Ash has Tracy and Misty with him in the Orange Islands. That's way, way back in, like, I don't know, season three, season two, something like that. Um, Tracy is a sketch artist who sketches Pokemon. And at some point in his journeys on the Orange Islands, he ends up sketching a strange Pokemon, but it's very like shadowed. You can't really tell what it is. So even back in like, what would that have been, like 97, 98, they were teasing all of these future Pokemon. I had mentioned in our previous episode that there's a Psyduck Pokemon card that came out in 1996, where in the background it looks like there's a fish jumping out of the water. And in the new Scarlet and Violet games, they took that fish and confirmed that it was actually a Pokemon and not just a regular fish. So it there's all sorts of stuff yet to be explored and explained, and tons of lore and tons of conspiracy theories and all this. Like, I still don't know what happened to the GS ball, and you guys can go and Google that. That's for another episode. But man, I would love it if they would finally do something with that. That was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is left open-ended on purpose for the franchise to continue, right? Like, who knows how many
Right,
more years it will go off into the future, and they'll introduce new generations and new Pokemon. So they always kind of leave it open-ended to add more. But
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
cool. All right. Well, let's get into the main meat of this episode, which is the types themselves. So Pokemon are organized by a classification system known as types. They define the elemental attributes of Pokemon and their moves, influencing the effectiveness of attacks in battle. As of Generation 9, there are 19 distinct types, comprising 18 standard types and the unique stellar type. Additionally, a peculiar unknown type, marked by 3 question marks, existed temporarily from Generations 2 to 6. These types draw heavily from classical elemental themes prevalent in popular and mythological culture. A Pokemon can possess either a single type or a dual type identity. For example, Charmander embodies the essence of fire, while Bulbasaur blends grass and poison into its nature. Dual type Pokemon, as their name suggests, wield the strengths and weaknesses of both their types. And then we'll just list the current roster of the 18 current types that exist. So first you have normal type, fire, fighting, water, flying, grass, poison, electric, ground, psychic, rock, ice, bug, dragon, ghost, dark, steel, fairy, and then stellar. And just a little note that no Pokemon is naturally stellar. It is a temporary state that they can become after they are terrestrialized or through terrestrialization. Um, and it doesn't defensively. They're treated as original type just defensively. So I will note that typing kind of has 2 categories. The Pokemon is a certain type, and their attacks or their moves are also a type of attack or move. So usually this is makes more sense with like a dual type Pokemon. Let's say you're using your Bulbasaur, you can use a poison move or a grass type move, right? So the Pokemon has a distinct type, but also their moves and attacks have a distinct type. So just to keep that duality in mind.
Hmm.
And then the final type that was temporary only between it was removed in Generation 5 is that triple question mark, which was neutrally effective against all types, and all types were neutral towards it. I think that was just kind of a general category that they lumped certain moves into that didn't really have a definition until later on when they came up with a distinctive category to put those moves into.
Hmm. I'm remembering, so far as I can remember, there were only one or two Pokemon moves that actually had the three question marks.
Yeah, it
And
was very small, and like I said, it was more like a catch-all. I think they used in the game just to move on, and then eventually they would reassign those moves to a type. So that was completely done away with after Generation
yeah.
5.
Hmm. I think one of those moves was the move Curse. So for anybody playing the old Pokemon games, try looking for that move and let me know if it still has that.
Yeah. Um, of course, we are going to dive in more deeply into each of those types and their meanings and Pokemon about them in their own episodes, but we're just doing kind of a general overview of them all here. This system allows for 324 potential type pairings, of which 171 combinations are unique. Among these, 162 have been discovered and utilized as of Generation 9, which is the current generation we're in. So if a new generation gets released between when this episode's recorded and when our listeners hear it, obviously that information will be outdated as of Generation 9. In the Pokemon games, some Pokemon have changed types and have had their typings added to their current type. In Pokemon Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow, Magnemite and Voltorb were electric types. Clefairy and Jigglypuff were normal types, and Grimer was a poison type. When Steel type came out in Generation 2, Magnemite and Voltorb gained Steel typing, while Clefairy and Jigglypuff gained Fairy typing and lost their normal typing in Generation 6. Similarly, with the introduction of Sun and Moon, Grimer and the other Pokemon such as Meowth and Sandshrew gained a secondary form with new typings. For example, Generation 1 Sandshrew looks like a brown armadillo. Its Generation 7 counterpart looks like it has an Inuit hood or an igloo and is colored ice, white, blue with ice typing instead of its original ground type. Yeah, so with different regional variations of Pokemon too, a Pokemon could take on a different attribute and a different typing. And then obviously, historically, when Pokemon first came out, you have like classification changes. When they created the fairy type later on, they reclassified Clefairy and Jigglypuff, which just makes sense, right? Like if you introduce a new type in the next generation, you might take some old Pokemon that were one type and just completely rebrand them under another or add a new type to the ones that already exist. Um, and then, like I said, we'll get into those regional distinctions when we talk about those actual distinctive Pokemon. So, like, again, Sandshrew has that other version of himself with a completely different style and type, but he's still a Sandshrew variant.
Hmm. Something I'll add is just because I wasn't super clear on this, but Grimer is still a poison type. However, the Sun and Moon version of a Grimer is not a poison type, it's a dark type.
Right.
Um, so these different variations of these Pokemon have totally different typings. They're still the exact same Pokemon. If you play Pokemon Go, they utilize the same candies, look the exact same. It's just little details that are different, like their color or their typing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, again, some of that is in the sense of the world of like their regional differences. The way you have different breeds of a real life animal, you have different kinds of horses, different kinds of cats. But also some of it has to do with game limitations. I know there's some types that are lumped or changed differently or lumped together with another type. Like in the card game, they lump certain types together just because they don't have all the distinctive types. Like they wouldn't have like flying type energy. So those might get reclassified to be either normal or, a different type of Pokemon as well.
Which
Uh,
I'm just saying, when it comes to the card game, it makes zero sense to me how we've created a dragon type, we've created a fairy type, we've started coming out with Pokemon cards of, say, Clefairy, but it's a fairy type, not a normal. But we can't separate fighting, ground, poison, rock, or flying in the Pokemon card game. Like, how are we in Generation 9 and we still don't have symbols for these things yet?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they do have symbols, but yeah, not printed in card form.
Yeah.
Again, like a lot of it is based on like limitations and balance of the game. I don't know all the mechanics behind the scenes for that. Maybe they're going to, or they haven't gotten around to it, or for whatever reason it affects their balancing. But yeah, that's also just another thing to keep in mind is that there is a lore type that things are, and then they're obviously changed based on like limitations of gameplay and things like that.
Yeah.
All right. Even in the enigmatic foes of PokeStar Studios are not exempt from the influence of types. Every move carries a single type, shaping its effectiveness in battle. The type determines whether a move will deal devastating damage, strike with reduced force, or fail entirely, exceptions being exceedingly rare. Moves also receive a power boost when their type aligns with one of the user's types, reinforcing the synergy between Pokemon and their techniques. The importance of types extends beyond battles, as many gym leaders, Elite Four members, trial captains, and island kahunas centers their strategies around a specific type, turning these themes into their signature mark of mastery. So yeah, you have like trainers that specialize in a certain type. So like Lieutenant Surge is all about electric types, or Brock, when he was a gym leader, was all about rock types, right? So
Mhm.
Um, the stellar type, however, stands apart as a rarity. No Pokemon or move inherently belongs to this type. Instead, the wonders of terrestrialization allow a Pokemon to transform into the stellar type, imbuing moves like Terra Blast and Terra Starstorm with this alignment. So, and that's just a temporary state of being.
Mhm.
Some Pokemon have changed types over generations, like we mentioned. In the intricate dance of battle, the effectiveness of a move is dictated by the interplay between the move's type and the type or types of its target. This dynamic shapes the ebb and flow of every confrontation as elemental strengths and weaknesses come into play. So, I mean, let's do like a really obvious example of like water type being strong against the fire type. Um, yeah, obviously your Squirtle gain an advantage in inflicting damage using a water type attack against a fire based Pokemon. But it's not just that straightforward either. You also have the interplay of a move being a different type. So you can have your Pokemon who is a type. Usually, the way I like to see it is offensive and defensive
Mhm.
traits. Your defensive traits usually come out in the type of Pokemon that you are. And then the moves you use, which have their own typings, are kind of what will affect your opponent.
Right. And with all of that, there's a strategy to it as well. So there's people that play the Pokemon video games where you have a Squirtle, they're only going to teach it water type moves. They're only going to teach their Charizard fire type moves. This puts your Pokemon at a huge disadvantage when it goes to battle other gym types.
Yeah.
So give you an example. If you have your Charizard who only knows fire type attacks, and you bring it into a gym against rock types, it's not going to do very well. But if you were to teach it Seismic Toss, which I love teaching my Charizard in every game, now it knows a fighting type move. So you go into this battle with rock types. Now you have a rock type's weakness of fighting in one of your moves. In the same way, I'd like to teach my Gengar Thunderbolt or Thunder, so I can use it against normal types. I can use it against flying types, all sorts of different things, water types, whatever, right? So it also does kind of give you the element of surprise as well. People see a ghost type and they go, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. He knows ghost type moves or dark type moves,
Yeah, and they'll
whatever.
try and counter that move, that type of Pokemon. Yeah.
Right, that's right. But then you throw, especially in the case of the Charizard, they're probably going to throw a ground type at you. So Charizard can't in the actual games. But let's just say, for the sake of example, if I was able to teach my Charizard a grass type attack, now that ground type Pokemon that tried to wipe out my Charizard is going to die before it even gets a hit in on me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it adds is a cool depth of strategy to it. So it's not like at first, for a beginner, it's just rock, paper, scissors. And that even shows in the interplay of the starter Pokemon, right? Pick fire, fire beats water, water beats grass, or sorry, grass beats water, fire beats grass. It's very rock, paper, scissors, right? It's very
Yeah.
simple. But as the game develops, you have introduce more types and more attack types. Then it gets a little more like everything you're saying, right? You want to kind of change up your moves. You want to, you know, not just lean into the type of Pokemon that you're using to throw off your enemy, right? So it's
Right.
cool. It adds a more strategic element than just rock, paper, scissors.
Yes.
All right. Type effectiveness is a decisive force influencing the damage a move can inflict. Super effective moves deal massive damage and exploit a target's vulnerability. Super effectiveness varies depending on solo or dual typing. A water or ground type Pokemon will take a normal damage 2.6 times from a grass type Pokemon because both water and ground types are weak to grass types, whereas a water type Pokemon will only take 1.6 times damage from grass type Pokemon due to its solo typing. Yeah, so like we kind of briefly mentioned this earlier, was that different types have strengths and weaknesses against other types. And we'll break that down kind of more decisively in another episode instead of just like sitting here and listing what is strong against what. But there are charts there too that you can look into that just kind of gives you a general overlay of who's strong against what and how strong they are.
Hmm.
Not very effective moves land with diminished impact, dealing 25 to 60% of the regular damage, depending on type resistance. A ground and grass type Pokemon will only take 0.24% of an electric type attack due to both of its typings being extra resistant to electric attacks. The same ground and grass type will only receive 0.62% of ground or rock type attacks due to grass and ground types being resistant to ground and rock attacks. Yeah. So again, as there are weaknesses, there's also resistances between them. So no effect moves are utterly nullified when faced with complete immunity, rendering them powerless against certain types. Examples of this are normal type and physical moves against ghost type Pokemon, or electric attacks against ground type Pokemon. In rare or curious circumstances, Pokemon or their moves may shed their elemental identity, becoming what some call typeless, or akin to normal type moves. This phenomenon arises through specific effects that strip away a Pokemon's type. Types can also be denoted by a simple sigil as well as a color gradient. So, yeah, a lot of Pokemon is based around color coding. We mentioned earlier the color of the Pokemon kind of is a tip as to what type they might be. Um, each type has a symbol, a unique sigil. Again, we'll delve into that more as we delve into the types as we go in future episodes. But we just wanted to do like a kind of a bird's eye view of what is typing, how do Pokemon are generally classified into types, and how does typing interact with other types. But yeah, any final thoughts?
Um, Let me think here. No, I think the only thing that I would add to what you just read was that if you're playing the games or if you're playing the card games, you absolutely need to pay attention to your typing or you will lose and have a miserable time and you just won't get anywhere. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a card battle and I just pick a card because it's powerful, throw it in a deck. I don't pay attention to what it's strong to, what it's weak to, and then I end up getting wiped out before I even get the chance to use the card. The same
Yeah.
thing happens in gyms and everything else. If you do not have a strategy and you do not pay attention, you are going to get wiped every time.
Yeah. Yeah, like we mentioned, like there is a depth to the strategy. It's not just rock, paper, scissors. And yeah, you could lean too heavily on like I really like Charizard and I've invested all this time and energy into my Charizard, but you never taught him any alternative moves.
Right,
Um, even if you're, level whatever, you're still gonna get wiped with a Pokemon that's immune to his attacks or not very vulnerable to his attacks. So
right, right.
yeah.
The other thing too, for anybody, because you were mentioning that there's sources out there to check typing. PokeGenie is an excellent phone app that you can get. It shows you all your Pokemon typings, how strong they are, how weak they are to different things. It works great when you're playing the game against gym leaders. It's amazing. It's saved me numerous times, so I recommend checking it out.
Great. All right. With that, we'll end this episode and we'll see you guys next time. Sweet. All right. Oh, hold on. What the heck?